The courtroom fell into a dead silence. Everyone in the room, lawyers, spectators, even the bailiff, held their breath. Rookie Officer Jake Coleman stood defiantly before the towering figure of Judge Evelyn Marshall. His voice trembled, but his words were firm. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, gripping his belt tightly, "just because you wear that robe doesn't mean you can twist the law. I followed protocol, and I won't apologize for doing my job." Gasps echoed around the room. No one, absolutely no one, had ever spoken to Judge Marshall like that. She was known as the Iron Gavel, a woman who could destroy careers with just a few words. Her piercing blue eyes locked onto him like a hawk targeting its prey. The courtroom air turned ice cold. "Officer Coleman," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "do you have any idea what you've just done?" Jake swallowed hard. He felt the weight of every eye on him, the whispers circling like sharks sensing blood. He had no idea that the next words Judge Marshall would say would change his life forever. 3 weeks earlier, Jake Coleman had just gotten his badge. At 24, he was eager, determined, and maybe a little too confident. He wanted to prove he wasn't just another rookie. His first major assignment came sooner than expected. A stolen car had been reported speeding through the city. Dispatch said the driver was armed and dangerous. Jake's heart pounded as he gripped the wheel of his patrol car, sirens blaring as he chased the vehicle through the downtown streets. When the car finally swerved into an alley and came to a halt, Jake jumped out, gun drawn. "Step out of the vehicle," he shouted. The doors slowly opened, and out stepped an older man. Mid-50s, gray hair, trembling hands. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his eyes filled with fear. "Hands where I can see them," Jake ordered. "Officer, please," the man begged. "This is a misunderstanding." Jake didn't lower his weapon. "Down on the ground. Now." The man obeyed. Within minutes, backup arrived, and Jake helped cuff the suspect. When they searched the car, they found an unregistered firearm under the passenger seat. It seemed like an open-and-shut case. Or so Jake thought. The next morning, he walked into the station feeling like a hero. That was until his captain, a tough-as-nails veteran named Captain Reynolds, stormed into the room with a look that made grown men sweat. "Officer Coleman," he barked. "My office. Now." Jake followed, his heart racing. As soon as the door closed behind him, Reynolds threw a folder onto his desk. "Do you know who you arrested last night?" Jake frowned, opening the file. His stomach dropped. The man he had arrested was Richard Langston, one of the most powerful judges in the state, a man known for having connections with nearly every influential person in the city. But he was driving a stolen car. Jake protested. "There was a gun." Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temples. "Langston claims the car was lent to him by a friend." "The gun?" "He says he had no idea it was there." Jake clenched his fists. "He's lying." Reynolds looked at him hard. Maybe not. But here's the problem, rookie. Judge Langston is demanding that you be punished for harassment and wrongful arrest. He's taking this to court." Jake's stomach twisted. He had done everything by the book. He had followed the law. But now, he was the one on trial. A week later, he found himself standing before Judge Evelyn Marshall. And that's when things took a turn he never expected. Judge Marshall, a woman known for being ruthless, listened carefully to Langston's accusations. The older judge sat smugly in his chair, playing the role of an innocent victim. But Jake stood his ground. "I did my job, Your Honor," he said firmly. "I arrested a man driving a stolen car with an unregistered weapon inside. That's the law." And that's when he said the words that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. "Just because you wear that robe doesn't mean you can twist the law." Silence. Everyone waited for Judge Marshall's response. She stood up slowly, stepping down from the bench. She walked toward Jake, her heels clicking against the floor. When she stopped in front of him, she studied him closely. Then she spoke. "Officer Coleman," she said, her voice steady. "Do you know what happens to officers who cross powerful people in this city?" Jake held his breath. Judge Marshall leaned in just a little closer. "They disappear." The words sent chills down Jake's spine. The entire courtroom seemed to darken around him. But before he could even process what she meant, she added, And if you think this fight is over, you're wrong. Because now, you're in more danger than you realize. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears. Then, without another word, Judge Marshall turned back to her bench. Officer Coleman, she said, you will return to this courtroom in 1 week. Until then, I suggest you be very careful. Jake didn't know it yet, but his life had just changed forever. And it was only the beginning. Jake walked out of the courtroom feeling like he had just stepped into a storm. His hands were still shaking, his mind racing. They disappear. Judge Marshall's words echoed in his head. She wasn't just warning him. She was telling him something. Something dangerous. As soon as he stepped outside, a sharp voice called his name. Officer Coleman. Jake turned to see Captain Reynolds standing by his patrol car. His face was tight with frustration. Get in. Jake hesitated. Captain, Now. The ride back to the station was dead silent. Jake kept replaying the courtroom scene in his mind. Judge Marshall's words. The way she looked at him. Like she knew something he didn't. As soon as they reached the station, Reynolds pulled into the back parking lot and shut off the engine. He turned to Jake, his expression unreadable. You have no idea what you just did back there, Reynolds said, his voice low. Jake frowned. I defended myself. I didn't do anything wrong. Reynolds let out a heavy sigh. Listen to me, kid. Judge Langston isn't just some old man with a title. He has connections, powerful ones, people who make problems disappear. And right now, you're the problem. Jake clenched his fists. So what? I just roll over and let him get away with it? You don't get it. Reynolds snapped. This isn't just about you. When you challenge men like Langston, they don't come after just you. They come after your family, your friends, your entire life. Jake's stomach twisted. He thought about his mother, who worked as a nurse at the city hospital. His younger sister, still in college. He had never considered that his fight could put them at risk. Reynolds ran a hand down his face. Look, I don't want to see another good cop taken down. I've seen it too many times. My advice? Lay low. Keep your head down. Don't push this. But Jake couldn't. Not after what Judge Marshall had said. He looked Reynolds in the eye. What did she mean? Judge Marshall. She said I was in more danger than I realized. Does she know something? Reynolds hesitated. A flicker of something. Concern? Fear? Crossed his face. She's trying to warn you, Reynolds admitted. Judge Marshall. She used to be different. She was one of the only people who ever stood up to Langston. But then something happened. A case, years ago. No one knows the full story, but after that, she changed. She stopped fighting back. She became one of them. Jake's jaw tightened. And now she's trying to scare me into backing off, too? Reynolds looked at him for a long moment. Then, he shook his head. I think she's doing the opposite. Jake frowned. What do you mean? Reynolds opened the door and stepped out. Before walking away, he said, I think she's trying to help you. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with everything that had happened. The courtroom. Langston's smug face. Judge Marshall's warning. At around midnight, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated before answering. Hello? A woman's voice came through, calm but urgent. Officer Coleman, listen to me carefully. You're in danger. Do not go home tonight. Jake sat up straight. Who is this? A slight pause. Then, someone who knows what happens when you push too hard. Jake's blood ran cold. Judge Marshall? A long silence. Then, the line went dead. Jake stared at his phone. His heart was pounding. What was happening? And more importantly, what was he about to walk into? The next morning, Jake showed up at the station exhausted but determined. He needed answers. He needed to know the truth about Langston, Judge Marshall, and what he had just gotten himself into. He barely made it through the front doors when he heard someone shouting, Captain, we got a problem. Jake turned and saw Officer Martinez, one of the senior officers, rushing toward Reynolds' office. Jake followed, curiosity and concern growing in his chest. Inside, Reynolds stood by his desk, looking down at something. His face was pale. Jake stepped in. What's going on? Reynolds turned the file around so Jake could see. It was a police report. A crime scene photo was clipped to the top. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The photo showed a black sedan. A bullet hole through the driver's side window. Blood splattered across the seat. The victim? Richard Langston. Jake's head spun. Wait, what? Reynolds exhaled sharply. Judge Langston was found shot in his car early this morning, just a few hours after you got that phone call. Jake felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just about an arrest anymore. This was something bigger. Something deadly. And now, Jake was right in the middle of it. The air in the captain's office was thick with tension. Jake's eyes were glued to the crime scene photo. Judge Langston's lifeless body slumped over in his car, the bullet hole in the driver's window sending chills down his spine. This can't be real, Jake muttered. I saw him yesterday. He was alive, sitting in that courtroom, acting like he owned the world. Captain Reynolds rubbed his temples. Well, someone just made sure he doesn't own anything anymore. Officer Martinez shook his head. The timing is suspicious. First, Langston tries to bury you in court. Then, just a few hours later, he turns up dead? Kid, you better hope you have an airtight alibi. Jake's stomach clenched. You think I had something to do with this? Reynolds looked at him with tired eyes. I don't think that. But whoever did this, they made it look like a hit. And considering the argument you had with Langston, you're already on the list of suspects. Jake clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a bad situation. This was a nightmare. Reynolds continued. Right now, Internal Affairs is going to be all over this. You were the last officer to arrest Langston, and you challenged a judge in open court. They're going to dig into your life, your phone records, your finances, everything. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears. This doesn't make sense. Langston had power. Enemies. Someone else wanted him dead. Martinez folded his arms. Then you better find out who. Because if you don't, they're going to pin this on you. Jake's fists tightened. His whole career, his life, was on the line. And the worst part? He had no idea who to trust. Jake left the captain's office in a daze. His thoughts raced. Someone had killed Langston. Someone who wanted him gone. And just last night, he had received a call warning him not to go home. Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled to his call log. The unknown number from last night. He tapped on it and called back. Nothing. No ring. No voicemail. Like the number didn't even exist. Judge Marshall. She was the only person who knew something. The only person who had warned him. He had to talk to her. Jake parked his patrol car outside the courthouse, stepping out into the cold morning air. The entire city was buzzing with news of Langston's murder. It was all over the radio, the newspapers, even the faces of people walking by. He pushed through the courthouse doors, making his way toward Judge Marshall's chambers. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but when he got there, the door was already open. That's when his gut twisted. He stepped inside cautiously. The office was dim, the heavy curtains drawn. The large wooden desk sat untouched. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with legal books that hadn't been moved in years. Then he saw her. Judge Marshall stood by the window, staring out over the city. She didn't turn when he walked in. You shouldn't be here, Officer Coleman, she said softly. Jake's hands clenched into fists. I think I should. She sighed. You've made yourself a target. And now Langston is dead. Jake stepped forward. You knew this was coming, didn't you? Silence. Jake's voice hardened. You called me last night. You told me not to go home. Why? Finally, she turned to face him. Her piercing blue eyes held something new. Not just authority, fear. You were next. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Judge Marshall took a slow step toward him. Langston wasn't the only one in danger. Whoever killed him, whoever wanted him gone, was cleaning up loose ends. And you, Officer Coleman, became a loose end the moment you stood up to him. Jake felt his heart hammer against his ribs. Who are they? Judge Marshall pressed her lips together. A group more powerful than you realize. They hide behind the law, behind wealth, behind people like Langston. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just a puppet. And someone just cut his strings. Jake swallowed hard. So now what? Am I supposed to just run? Marshall gave a small, sad smile. No, Officer Coleman. You're supposed to survive. Before Jake could respond, there was a sudden noise outside the office. A sharp, metallic clank. A second later, Bang! The window behind Judge Marshall shattered, glass exploding inward. Jake dove forward on instinct, tackling the judge to the ground as another gunshot rang through the air. A sniper. The courthouse was under attack. Jake shielded Judge Marshall as glass rained down around them, the sound of panicked voices rising outside the office. Then, through the chaos, Jake heard something chilling. Footsteps. Someone was coming, and they weren't here to talk. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears. The sniper shot had shattered the window, and now, footsteps. Someone was coming. His training kicked in. He grabbed Judge Marshall and pulled her behind the heavy wooden desk, pressing her low to the ground. "Stay down," he whispered. She didn't argue. The footsteps grew louder. Slow. Controlled. Whoever was coming wasn't in a hurry. They were confident. Jake reached for his gun, heart pounding. Then, the door creaked open. A shadow stretched across the office floor. "Judge Marshall," a smooth voice called out. "We need to talk." Jake recognized that voice immediately. Detective Paul Grayson. Grayson was a veteran detective with internal affairs. He had a reputation. Sharp, relentless, and willing to bend the rules when necessary. He wasn't just some cop doing his job. He played the game at a higher level. And right now, he was standing in the doorway of a crime scene. Gun in hand, Jake tightened his grip on his own weapon. He didn't trust Grayson. Not one bit. "You all right in there, Judge?" Grayson asked casually. "Heard some gunshots. Thought I'd check in." Jake stayed silent, his body coiled like a spring. He didn't believe for a second that Grayson had just happened to be nearby. Judge Marshall spoke up from behind the desk. "Someone just tried to kill me." Grayson took a slow step forward. "Yeah. Seems like Langston had more enemies than we thought." Jake's eyes narrowed. Was that a threat? He rose slowly from behind the desk, keeping his gun lowered but ready. "You always show up this fast to crime scenes, detective?" Grayson gave him a lazy smirk. "I go where the action is, Coleman. You should know that by now." Jake didn't blink. "You're IA. This isn't your case." Grayson chuckled. "Oh, but it is now. Judge Langston's murder? That's big. And now a sniper taking shots at another judge? That's huge." He tilted his head. "And guess who's at the center of both?" Jake clenched his jaw. "Don't start." Grayson shrugged. "Just making an observation." He turned his attention back to Judge Marshall. "Judge, I'm gonna need you to come with me. For your protection." Something about his tone made Jake's stomach twist. Judge Marshall hesitated. "Protection?" Grayson nodded. "Whoever's behind this isn't done. You're a loose end now." Jake's fists clenched at that phrase. Loose end. The same words Judge Marshall had used earlier. "You got a safe house ready for her?" Jake asked, testing him. Grayson smirked. "Let's just say, she'll be well taken care of." Jake's gut screamed to no. "Not happening," Jake said, stepping between Grayson and the judge. "I'll take her somewhere safe." Grayson's eyes darkened. "You don't call the shots here, Coleman." Jake didn't back down. "I don't trust you." Grayson took another step forward, lowering his voice. "You should. Because right now, IA is all over your case. Langston turns up dead, and you just happen to be there when another judge gets attacked?" He smirked. "Starting to look real bad for you, rookie." Jake's blood boiled. Judge Marshall stood up slowly. "Detective Grayson," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I appreciate your concern, but I'll be leaving with Officer Coleman." Grayson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. "You sure about that, Judge?" Marshall nodded. "Yes." A long silence. Then, Grayson exhaled and shook his head. "All right. Your call." He stepped back toward the door, but before leaving, he looked Jake dead in the eye. "You better be careful, Coleman." And then, he was gone. Jake didn't move until he was sure Grayson was out of the building. Only then did he turn to Judge Marshall. "We need to go. Now." She nodded. "Where?" Jake didn't have a plan yet, but he knew one thing. Whoever was pulling the strings in this city wouldn't stop. Langston was just the first. And now, he and Judge Marshall were next. They had to disappear before it was too late. 20 minutes later, Jake was behind the wheel of his car, Judge Marshall in the passenger seat. They had taken the back exit of the courthouse, slipping away unnoticed. "Where are we going?" Marshall asked. Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. Somewhere safe. She looked at him carefully. Do you have somewhere safe? Jake hesitated. There was only one place that came to mind. A place no one would think to look. My grandfather's cabin, he finally said. It's in the woods, about an hour outside the city. No phones, no cameras. Just an old radio. Marshall nodded. That'll do. As they drove, Jake's mind raced. Grayson showing up so quickly. The sniper attack. Langston's murder. It wasn't random. It was all connected. And the deeper he got, the more he realized. This wasn't just about him. This was bigger than Langston. Bigger than Judge Marshall. Someone was tying up loose ends. And unless Jake figured this out fast, he'd be the next one to disappear. They reached the cabin just as the sun was setting. It was a small, wooden structure surrounded by thick trees. Remote. Isolated. Jake parked the car and stepped out, scanning the area. Everything looked untouched. No tire tracks, no signs of movement. They were safe. For now. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old wood and dust. Jake grabbed a flashlight and checked the windows while Marshall sat down in an old chair. She sighed, rubbing her temples. We're in deep, aren't we? Jake exhaled. Yeah, we are. Silence filled the room. Then, Marshall looked up. I need to tell you something. Jake turned to her. What? Her eyes darkened. About Langston. About what he was really involved in. Jake's breath caught. You knew? Marshall nodded slowly. Yes. And so did Grayson. Jake's stomach twisted. Grayson was working with Langston? Marshall met his gaze. No. Grayson was working for the people who killed him. Jake's heart stopped. Before he could even respond, there was a sudden crash outside. Both of them froze. A shadow moved past the window. Someone had found them. And this time, they weren't here to talk. Jake's body tensed, instincts kicking into overdrive. Someone was out there. His hand moved to his gun as he flicked off the flashlight, plunging the cabin into darkness. Judge Marshall's breath was steady, but he could feel her fear. The night outside was silent. No wind. No rustling leaves. Then, crunch. A footstep. Someone was approaching the front porch. Jake moved fast. He grabbed Marshall's wrist and pulled her toward the back door. We need to go. Now. But before they could move, boom. The front door exploded open, the wood splintering into shards. Jake shoved Marshall down behind the couch, using it as cover. He drew his gun, heart pounding. Silence. A shadow stepped into the cabin. Tall, broad shoulders, moving with controlled precision. Then, another figure. A second man. Both wore tactical boots and dark clothing. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but Jake could see the dull glint of silencers on their pistols. These weren't random thugs. They were professionals. Jake took a slow breath. Think. The cabin had only two doors, the front, which was now compromised, and the back, which led into the dense woods. Their only chance was to escape before these guys realized where they were hiding. But before he could signal to Marshall, one of the men spoke. Officer Coleman. His voice was cold, emotionless. We don't have to do this the hard way. Jake gritted his teeth. The second man took another step forward. Give us the judge, and you walk away. Jake's stomach twisted. They weren't after him. They wanted Marshall. That meant she knew something worth killing for. Marshall stayed completely still, barely breathing. Jake tightened his grip on his gun. Then, he made a decision. In one swift motion, he fired. Bang! The shot was deafening in the small cabin. The first man dropped, a bullet tearing through his shoulder. He stumbled back, hitting the wall hard. The second man reacted instantly, raising his weapon, but Jake was already moving. He tackled the man before he could fire, slamming him into the wooden floor. The gun skittered away into the shadows. The assassin was strong, too strong. Jake barely had time to react before the man twisted, flipping their positions. A fist slammed into Jake's ribs. Pain exploded through his side. The man reached for a knife. But Judge Marshall acted first. She grabbed a heavy oil lamp from the table and smashed it over the man's head. Crack. He collapsed. Jake rolled to his feet, breathing hard. The first man, wounded but still moving, staggered toward his gun. Jake kicked it away and pointed his own weapon at him. "Don't move," Jake warned. The man froze, breathing heavily. Blood dripped from his wounded shoulder, but he didn't look afraid. Jake took a step forward. "Who sent you?" The man smirked. "You already know." Jake's jaw clenched. "Say it." The man chuckled, wincing slightly from his injury. Then, he spoke a name that sent chills down Jake's spine. Detective Grayson. Jake's breath caught. He had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed made his blood run cold. Grayson wasn't just involved. He was orchestrating this. Jake's grip tightened on his gun. Why does he want the judge? The man smirked again. Because she's the last loose end. Jake's stomach twisted. Everything was coming together. Langston's death, the attack at the courthouse, the sniper, and now, Grayson had sent assassins to finish the job. Before Jake could say another word, the wounded man suddenly bit down, hard. Jake's heart dropped. Cyanide. A second later, the assassin convulsed, his body stiffening. Then, he was dead. Jake stepped back, his pulse hammering in his ears. Marshall exhaled shakily. "We need to go. Now." Jake nodded. "Yeah." They grabbed what little supplies they could and slipped out the back door. The dense woods stretched out before them, endless and dark. They had no choice. They had to run. An hour later, Jake and Judge Marshall stopped to catch their breath deep in the forest. They had covered as much ground as they could, moving through the trees in near-total darkness. Marshall sat on a fallen log, rubbing her temples. "Grayson wants me dead." Jake crouched in front of her. "Tell me the truth. What does he want to cover up?" Marshall hesitated. Then, finally, she spoke. Langston was working for a secret network. Judges, law enforcement, politicians, they control everything in this city. Corruption runs deeper than you can imagine. Jake's stomach twisted. "And you?" Marshall exhaled. "I used to fight it. A long time ago. But after a case went wrong, after the people I trusted were killed, I stopped. I played along. I became one of them just to survive." Jake clenched his jaw. "But you tried to warn me." Marshall met his gaze. "Because I see something in you, Officer Coleman. Something I lost a long time ago." Jake swallowed hard. "So, Langston, he was part of this network?" Marshall nodded. "Yes, but he got sloppy. He became a liability. And when he realized they were going to get rid of him, he tried to cut a deal to save himself. But someone got to him first." Jake processed her words. "And now they're tying up loose ends. First Langston, then you. And if I don't walk away, I'm next." Marshall nodded gravely. Silence hung between them. Then, Jake exhaled. "I can't run from this." Marshall frowned. "Jake, if you go after them, you'll be up against powerful people. People who don't leave witnesses." Jake looked into her eyes. "Then I'll make sure I'm not a witness." Marshall's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Jake stood up, his jaw set. "I won't just fight back. I'll expose them. All of them." Marshall hesitated. Then, for the first time, she gave a small, tired smile. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Officer Coleman." Jake smirked. "Maybe both." Before she could respond, a sudden noise in the distance made them freeze. The sound of engines. Jake turned, his stomach dropping. Headlights cut through the trees, bouncing off the darkness. They weren't alone. The hunt wasn't over. And now, they had nowhere left to hide. The rumbling of engines cut through the forest, growing louder with every passing second. The headlights flickered between the trees, their beams bouncing across the uneven terrain. Jake's pulse quickened. "They're tracking us." Judge Marshall stood beside him, her breath unsteady. "We can't outrun them forever." Jake scanned their surroundings. The trees were dense, but if these men had vehicles, they wouldn't be on foot. "We don't have to outrun them," he said. "We just have to disappear." Marshall frowned. "And how do you suggest we do that?" Jake's mind worked fast. "There's an old hunting trail up ahead. It runs alongside a river. If we follow it and cross the water, it'll throw off their scent. They'll have to guess which way we went." Marshall nodded. "Then we better move." They sprinted through the trees, dodging low-hanging branches and uneven roots. The sound of the engines grew closer, and soon, Jake could make out dark figures moving between the beams of headlights. Armed men. And they weren't searching. They were hunting. Jake gritted his teeth. They reached the trail, and the distant sound of rushing water told him they were close to the river. But then, a spotlight flared to life, cutting through the darkness. There. I see them, a voice shouted. Jake cursed under his breath. Run, he barked. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets snapping against tree trunks, splintering wood in deadly bursts. Jake shoved Marshall ahead, shielding her as they sprinted toward the riverbank. He could see the water now, dark and fast-moving. We have to cross, Jake shouted. Marshall hesitated for only a moment before plunging in. The icy current hit like a punch, nearly sweeping her off her feet. Jake followed, his body tensing at the freezing temperature. He grabbed Marshall's arm, steadying her as they fought the current. Behind them, men crashed through the undergrowth. Flashlights swept across the water. There they are, someone yelled. More gunfire. Bullets tore into the water around them, but the current was pulling them fast, carrying them downstream. Jake held on to Marshall tightly. Stay low. Let the water take us. They drifted further downriver, the sound of their pursuers fading into the distance. Finally, after what felt like forever, the river slowed, and they managed to crawl onto the muddy bank, gasping for air. Marshall shivered violently, hugging herself. That was not part of my plan. Jake gave a breathless chuckle. Yeah? Welcome to my world. She shot him a look, but there was something else in her expression. Respect? They weren't out of danger yet, but for now, they had survived. An hour later, they had moved deeper into the forest, far from where their pursuers had last seen them. Jake had managed to start a small fire, just enough to provide warmth without drawing attention. Marshall sat close to the flames, rubbing her hands together. They won't stop, will they? Jake exhaled. Not until we stop them first. She looked at him carefully. And how exactly do we do that? Jake pulled out his phone, staring at the black screen. No signal. He figured as much. We need leverage, he said. If we can expose them, bring their entire operation into the light, they'll have nowhere to hide. Marshall sighed. Easier said than done. These people control the system. You think the police are going to listen to you? Jake shook his head. Not the police. He met her gaze. The public. Marshall frowned. You want to go public with this? Jake nodded. We find evidence, real, undeniable proof of their network. Documents, names, transactions. We get it all. Then, we drop it where the entire world can see it. Marshall studied him. That's a suicide mission. Jake smirked. Only if we fail. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. And where do you think we'll find this evidence? Jake thought for a moment. Then, an idea struck him. Langston's house, he said. Marshall blinked. What? Jake sat forward. Think about it. Langston knew he was a target. If he was desperate enough to cut a deal, that means he had something valuable. Blackmail. Proof of the network. And I'm willing to bet he kept it somewhere safe. Marshall considered this. His estate was locked down after his murder. Police and federal agents have probably gone through everything. Jake shook his head. Not if they were part of the network. They wouldn't want to risk exposing something by accident. If Langston had something that could ruin them, they would have buried it, not destroyed it. Marshall pursed her lips. You think you can find something they missed? Jake smiled. I know I can. Marshall let out a dry chuckle. You really are reckless, aren't you? Jake shrugged. That's what got me into this mess. Might as well see it through. She sighed, then nodded. All right, let's do it. Jake's smirk faded as reality settled in. They had a plan. But breaking into the estate of a murdered judge, stealing evidence from one of the most powerful criminal networks in the country, and surviving long enough to expose the truth? That was a whole different challenge. And failure wasn't an option, because if they lost this fight, they wouldn't get another chance. The night was still, but Jake's mind was racing. Breaking into Langston's estate was a high-risk, high-reward move. If they found what they needed, they could expose the entire operation. If they got caught, there wouldn't be a trial. Marshall sat across from him, the flickering firelight casting shadows on her face. How do we even get inside? Jake exhaled. We need to move fast. If they haven't found whatever Langston was hiding yet, they will soon. We need to get there before they do. Marshall frowned. And what makes you think we can get past security? Jake smirked. Because I used to be a cop. And cops love their routines. By the time they reached the outskirts of Langston's estate, the sky was a deep navy blue. Dawn was still a couple of hours away. Jake crouched behind the tree line, scanning the property. The mansion was massive, 3 stories of polished stone and glass, surrounded by iron gates and high-tech security, motion detectors, cameras, and a patrol unit parked at the front. Looks locked down tight, Marshall whispered. Jake studied the patterns. The patrol car outside had 2 officers inside, one sipping coffee, the other checking his phone. They're relaxed, Jake muttered. They don't expect trouble. Marshall gave him a look. So what's the plan? Jake thought for a moment. Then he spotted the gardener's entrance. A small side gate near the back of the estate, less monitored. If they moved fast, they could slip in before the next security sweep. He turned to Marshall. Follow my lead. They moved low, staying within the shadows. When they reached the gate, Jake pulled out a multi-tool from his pocket. Years of police training had taught him that a good cop always carried one. A quick flick of his wrist, click. The lock snapped open. Marshall raised an eyebrow. I'm not going to ask how you learned to do that. Jake grinned. Smart. They slipped inside, moving through the estate's back gardens. It was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Jake's gut told him they weren't alone. He motioned for Marshall to stay low. They moved toward the house, stopping just beneath the large bay windows of Langston's study. Jake peered inside. The room was untouched. Dark mahogany furniture, a massive bookshelf, a grand desk in the center. It looked like it had been frozen in time. If Langston had kept records, this was where they would be. Jake tested the window. Locked. But it was an old lock. With a quick jab of his multi-tool, click. The window slid open. They climbed inside, landing softly on the plush carpet. Jake scanned the room. All right, we don't have much time. We need to find footsteps. They both froze. Then, a voice. Check Langston's study again. Make sure nothing was missed. Jake's breath hitched. They weren't alone. The sound of heavy boots echoed down the hall. Whoever was outside was armed. Jake grabbed Marshall's arm and pulled her behind the massive bookshelf. Seconds later, the door creaked open. A flashlight beam swept across the room. Jake held his breath. A man stepped inside, dressed in black tactical gear. Not a cop. Not security. This was one of Grayson's men. The man moved to Langston's desk, flipping through drawers. He cursed under his breath. Where the hell is it? Jake exchanged a look with Marshall. They were looking for the same thing. The man pulled out his phone and made a call. Yeah. Nothing in the study, he muttered. No, we already searched the safe. The hard drive's not here. Jake's heart skipped. Hard drive. That was it. The proof. If Langston had hidden it, that meant it was somewhere they hadn't checked. Then, the bookshelf. Jake slowly ran his fingers along the wood paneling behind them. Something felt off. A gap. A hollow space. Jake's mind raced. If Langston had hidden the hard drive inside the bookshelf, no one would have thought to check. The man in the room sighed in frustration. Fine. We'll check again in the morning. Jake barely had time to react before the man turned. Walking toward the bookshelf, Marshall grabbed Jake's hand, squeezing tight. They held their breath as the man's boots stopped inches away from them. The tension was suffocating. Then, his phone rang. Yeah, I'm coming back now, the man muttered. He turned and left. The moment the door clicked shut, Jake exhaled. They had to move. Jake ran his fingers along the shelf again, pressing into the hollow space. Then, a faint click. A hidden compartment swung open. Inside, a small, black hard drive. Jake grabbed it, heart racing. This was it. The evidence Langston had kept. The key to everything. Marshall stared at it. Is that? Jake nodded. Yeah. Before she could respond, the alarm system activated. A loud, blaring siren shook the estate. Jake's blood ran cold. They know we're here, Marshall whispered. Then, running footsteps. Guards. Jake gritted his teeth. We need an exit. Now. Marshall looked around frantically. The window. Jake shoved the hard drive into his jacket and rushed to the window. Bang. The study door burst open. Guards storming inside, weapons raised. Jake didn't hesitate. He jumped. The cold night air hit him as he rolled onto the grass. Marshall followed seconds later, landing hard. Go. Jake shouted. They sprinted toward the gardens, gunfire cracking behind them. Jake grabbed Marshall's wrist and pulled her toward the outer gate. But then, a black SUV screeched to a stop outside the property. The door swung open. A man stepped out. Jake's stomach dropped. Detective Grayson. He stood there, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. Well, he said. Did you find what you were looking for, Coleman? Jake froze. Guards surrounded them, weapons aimed. They were trapped. Grayson tilted his head. Be a good cop and hand it over. Jake clenched his fists. He had the evidence, the proof. But now, there was no way out. Jake's heartbeat hammered in his chest. They were trapped. Grayson stood in front of the SUV, his smirk infuriatingly calm, like a man who already knew he had won. Behind him, the guards tightened their grips on their weapons, forming a circle around Jake and Judge Marshall. There was no easy escape. Jake's hand brushed against the hard drive in his jacket. If he gave it up, they might live. But if he didn't? Grayson sighed dramatically. Come on, Coleman. Let's not drag this out. I don't want to have to shoot you. Jake glanced at Marshall. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable, but he could see it in her eyes. We don't hand it over. Jake turned back to Grayson. I don't have anything. Grayson chuckled. Coleman, you were a rookie 5 minutes ago. Don't try playing big league poker with me. He nodded to one of the guards. Search him. Jake tensed. If they found the hard drive, it was over. The guard stepped forward. Then, boom. A sudden explosion rocked the night. The estate's north wall burst into flames, sending a shockwave through the ground. Guards stumbled, some falling to their knees. Jake didn't waste a second. He moved. His elbow drove into the guard's throat, knocking him off balance. Marshall lunged forward, kicking another guard's knee out from under him. Grayson shouted something, but the chaos had erupted. Jake ripped the gun from the stunned guard's holster and fired into the air. Bang! Bang! The remaining guards hesitated just long enough for Jake to grab Marshall's wrist. Run! He yelled. They bolted. The fire spread quickly, licking up the stone walls of Langston's estate. Thick black smoke clouded the air, making it hard to see. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets whizzed past, kicking up dirt and debris. Jake's mind raced. Who set off the explosion? They weren't alone. But right now, that didn't matter. Survive first. Questions later. They reached the outer fence, a tall iron structure topped with spikes. Boost me up, Marshall gasped. Jake clasped his hands together, giving her a lift. She scrambled up, reaching for the top. A bullet grazed Jake's shoulder. Pain flared through him, but he gritted his teeth and jumped, gripping the cold iron bars. Marshall pulled him up with what little strength she had left. Then, they dropped to the other side. Jake hit the ground hard, but there was no time for pain. More SUVs screeched onto the road ahead, cutting them off. Jake whirled around. They were stuck between the burning estate and Grayson's reinforcements. Then, a motorcycle engine roared. Jake barely had time to react before a masked rider skidded onto the scene. Get on! The masked figure yelled. Jake didn't hesitate. He pulled Marshall onto the back seat and swung on behind her. The rider hit the gas, tires squealing, and they tore down the road just as more bullets ripped through the air behind them. For the first few miles, no one spoke. The cold night air whipped past them as the motorcycle sped down the deserted highway. Jake's mind was racing. His shoulder burned from the bullet wound, but adrenaline kept him going. Finally, after about 15 minutes, the rider pulled off the main road and into a secluded warehouse lot. The bike skidded to a stop. Jake and Marshall jumped off, breathing hard. The masked rider swung off the bike, pulling off their helmet. Jake froze. It was Officer Martinez. What the hell? Jake started, completely stunned. Martinez gave him a wry look. Yeah. You're welcome, rookie. Marshall blinked. You? You set the explosion? Martinez smirked. You think I'd let you two take on the whole damn network by yourselves? Jake exhaled. He had so many questions, but first, he pulled the hard drive from his jacket and held it up. This is it, he said. This is what Langston was hiding. Martinez's eyes darkened. Then we have work to do. Jake nodded. This wasn't over. Not even close. Inside the warehouse, Martinez set up a laptop. The old structure had once been used by the department to store evidence before it was shut down. Now, it was the only place safe enough for them to lay low. Jake leaned over the table, his jaw tight. All right, let's see what Langston was hiding. Martinez plugged in the hard drive. The screen flickered to life. Files loaded, hundreds of them. Videos, financial records, names. Jake's stomach twisted. Every corrupt judge, every politician, every cop on the payroll, everything. Marshall paled. This is a kill list. Martinez whistled low. Langston had insurance on everyone. He was never planning to go down alone. Jake clenched his fists. And now we have it. Marshall exhaled shakily. If we release this to the public, the entire city will explode. Jake's eyes burned with determination. Good. Martinez crossed his arms. You do realize the second we make a move, Grayson and his people will come down on us hard. Jake nodded. Let them. He leaned forward. We expose this. We take them all down. Silence. Then, Marshall gave a slow, determined nod. Martinez cracked his knuckles. All right, rookie. Let's burn this whole thing to the ground. But before they could celebrate, Jake's phone buzzed. Unknown number. His stomach clenched. Slowly, he answered. Yeah. A voice came through. Calm. Cold. Deadly. That was a mistake, Coleman. Jake's blood ran cold. Grayson, you think you're the hero? Grayson continued. You think you can stop this? A pause. Then, you just put a target on everyone you love. Jake's breath hitched. Grayson chuckled. You made this personal, rookie. And now, I'm going to return the favor. Click. The line went dead. Jake's grip on the phone tightened. His jaw clenched. Grayson had just declared war. Jake lifted his head, his gaze like steel. Then let's finish this. Jake stood frozen, the weight of Grayson's words pressing down on him like a vice. You just put a target on everyone you love. Grayson wasn't bluffing. He wasn't the type. If he made a threat, he followed through. Jake's mind raced. His mom, his sister, they had nothing to do with this, but now they were in danger because of him. Marshall saw the change in his expression. What did he say? Jake exhaled, his fists clenched. He's coming after my family. Martinez cursed under his breath. Damn it. We should have seen this coming. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, already moving. I need to get to them before he does. Marshall stood up. Jake, wait. Running in blind is exactly what Grayson wants. Jake spun around, eyes blazing. Then what do you suggest? I just sit here while he... Marshall held up her hands. No, but if you rush in alone, you'll walk right into his trap. Martinez nodded. She's right, man. Grayson has resources. He's probably watching your family already. You show up and he's got you. Jake ground his teeth, his entire body tense. So what? I just do nothing? Marshall shook her head. No, we're going to outthink him. She turned to Martinez. You still have friends in the department, right? Ones we can trust? Martinez hesitated. A few. But the second we reach out, Grayson will know. Marshall's eyes darkened. Let him. Jake frowned. What are you thinking? She took a breath. We make him believe he's ahead of us. We let him think he's in control. But in reality, a small smirk formed on her lips. We set him up. 30 minutes later. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Martinez reached out to one of his trusted contacts in the department, a detective named Sarah Briggs. She wasn't deep in the network, but she had enough connections to make sure Grayson got the message. The message was clear. Jake Coleman is heading home. Alone. It was bait, and Grayson would take it. Meanwhile, Jake wasn't going anywhere near his house. Instead, Martinez and Marshall would retrieve his mom and sister, moving them to a safe location. Jake, on the other hand, was heading to Grayson's base of operations, where he planned to end this. Jake crouched behind a rusted-out van in the abandoned industrial yard where Grayson had been running his operations. This wasn't just a guess. Martinez's sources had confirmed this was where Grayson staged his last few moves. Jake had to be careful. Grayson's men were professionals. They didn't hesitate, and they didn't ask questions. But Jake wasn't here to fight. He was here to finish this. Slowly, he moved toward the main warehouse, sticking to the shadows. There were 2 guards posted outside, armed, alert. He couldn't afford to alert them. Jake picked up a loose metal bolt from the ground and tossed it toward the far fence. Clink. The guards snapped their attention toward the noise, moving to investigate. Jake moved. In 3 quick strides, he closed the distance and took down the first guard with a swift chokehold. The man struggled, but within seconds, he went limp. Before the second guard could react, Jake swung around, driving his elbow into the man's throat. The guard staggered, choking. Jake finished him with a clean right hook. Both were down. Jake exhaled, adjusting his grip on his gun. He was in. Now, he just needed to find Grayson. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, stacks of crates and equipment lining the walls. Jake moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Then, voices. He followed the sound, creeping toward an open office space overlooking the main floor. There, standing at a table covered in documents, blueprints, and surveillance photos, was Detective Grayson. He was alone. Jake took a deep breath. This was it. He stepped forward, gun raised. Hands where I can see them. Grayson barely flinched. Instead, he smirked. Well, that didn't take long. Jake kept his gun steady. Where are they? Grayson chuckled. Your family? Relax, Coleman. They're perfectly fine. He tilted his head. For now. Jake's jaw tightened. If you so much as touch them. Grayson laughed. Oh, cut the tough guy act. You don't scare me, rookie. Jake stepped forward. Then maybe this will. He pulled the hard drive from his jacket and held it up. Grayson's smirk vanished. Jake saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. Yeah, Jake said. I know everything. Every name. Every transaction. And in about 5 minutes. He tilted his head. The whole world will too. Grayson's face darkened. You wouldn't dare. Jake grinned. Wouldn't I? He reached for his phone, pretending to press a button. Grayson lunged. Jake sidestepped, dodging just in time. He slammed the hard drive into Grayson's jaw, sending the detective stumbling backward. But Grayson was fast. He recovered quickly, drawing his gun. Jake reacted on instinct, grabbing the nearest chair and hurling it at Grayson. The chair crashed into Grayson's arm, knocking his aim off. Jake charged forward, tackling him to the ground. They struggled, rolling across the concrete floor. Grayson punched hard, knocking Jake backward. But Jake wasn't playing defense. He grabbed a steel pipe from the floor and swung. Crack! The pipe slammed into Grayson's ribs, sending him crashing against the desk. He gasped, clutching his side. Jake stood over him, breathing hard. It's over. Grayson coughed, laughing weakly. You think you won? He grinned through the pain. You don't get it, do you? Grayson wheezed. Jake frowned. What? Grayson's smile widened. You took down Langston. You came after me. But you still don't know who we work for. Jake's blood ran cold. Grayson coughed, wiping blood from his lip. You think I was in charge? He let out a painful laugh. Kid, I was just another pawn. Jake's stomach twisted. Grayson's eyes locked onto his. You might have won this battle, Coleman. A dark grin spread across his face. But you just started a war. Jake's hands tightened into fists. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Jake's pulse pounded in his ears as Grayson's words settled over him like a storm cloud. You might have won this battle, Coleman, but you just started a war. The worst part? Jake knew he wasn't bluffing. Grayson might have been a major player, but he wasn't the top of the food chain. Someone, or some group, was pulling the strings behind all of this. And Jake had just declared war on them. Grayson let out a weak chuckle, wincing as he clutched his ribs. You look worried, kid. Jake exhaled slowly, leveling his gun at him. I'm not worried. I'm just deciding how much jail time I want you to get. Grayson's smirk didn't fade. You think I'll make it to jail? Jake narrowed his eyes. Grayson leaned his head back against the desk, breathing heavily. You're messing with people who don't leave witnesses. You think they'll let me sit in a cell and talk? He chuckled. They'll kill me before sunrise. Jake knew he was right. The network didn't leave loose ends, and Grayson had just become one. But that wasn't Jake's concern anymore. Because if Grayson was a pawn, then somewhere out there, the real masterminds were watching and waiting. Jake kept his gun steady. Guess you should have picked better friends. Grayson's smirk faltered just slightly. Then, footsteps outside. Jake stiffened. Not good. Grayson grinned. You hear that? My friends are here. Jake clenched his jaw. He needed to move. Now. He grabbed the hard drive and backed toward the exit, keeping his gun trained on Grayson. You tell your friends something for me, Jake said coldly. I'm coming for them next. Grayson's smirk vanished. Jake didn't wait. He bolted. Jake moved fast. He needed to get out before backup arrived. As he slipped out the side door of the warehouse, he spotted 3 black SUVs pulling in. His stomach tightened. More of them. Armed men poured out of the vehicles, moving toward the warehouse. They were professionals, not police, not gangsters. Something worse. Jake didn't stick around to ask questions. He slipped into the shadows and ran. He had what he came for. Now he just had to survive long enough to use it. When Jake burst through the safe house doors, Marshall and Martinez were already waiting. The second Marshall saw him, she stood. Did you get it? Jake tossed the hard drive onto the table. Yeah. Martinez let out a breath. Damn. You actually pulled it off. Jake ignored him, turning to Marshall. Grayson was just a piece of this. There's something bigger. People pulling the strings from the shadows. And they know we're coming. Marshall frowned. How do you know? Jake exhaled. Because the second I left, 3 SUVs rolled in. Not cops. Not hitmen. Something worse. Silence settled over the room. Marshall rubbed her temples. If this network is bigger than Grayson, then we don't just have corrupt cops to deal with. We have judges, politicians, and God knows who else. Jake sat down, rubbing his hands over his face. He was exhausted. Martinez leaned forward. So what's the play now? Jake lifted his head. We take this public. Marshall hesitated. If we do this wrong, they'll bury it. Or worse, bury us. Jake shook his head. We can't go through the system. The second we try, someone inside will shut it down. We have to bypass them completely. Martinez frowned. How? Jake leaned forward, his voice steady. We leak everything. Marshall's eyes widened. What? Jake tapped the hard drive. We send this to every major news outlet. Every independent journalist. Hell, we drop it on the internet and let it spread like wildfire. Martinez let out a low whistle. That'll turn the whole city upside down. Jake's jaw clenched. Good. He exhaled. We've been on defense this whole time. It's time we hit back. Marshall studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, she said. Let's burn the whole thing down. The room was dead silent as Martinez worked on decrypting the files. Jake sat beside him, gun on the table, watching the loading bar fill. Marshall paced the room. Once this goes live, we won't be able to take it back. Jake nodded. I know. Martinez smirked. I kinda like this side of you, Coleman. Makes me feel like I trained you right. Jake rolled his eyes. Just get it done. 98%. 99%. Then 100%. The file uploaded. Every document, every video, every transaction, exposed. Within seconds, alerts flooded their phones. The files had gone viral. News stations, journalists, social media. The city was waking up to the biggest corruption scandal in decades. Marshall exhaled. We did it. Jake nodded. Yeah. Then, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at it for a second before answering. A calm, unfamiliar voice came through. You shouldn't have done that, Officer Coleman. Jake's grip tightened. Who is this? The voice chuckled. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you just made enemies in places you can't even imagine. Jake's jaw clenched. Good. I was getting bored. The voice sighed. You think this is over? You think you won? A pause. Then, cold amusement. You just declared war on an empire. Jake exhaled slowly. Then I hope they're ready to lose. Click. The call ended. Jake set his phone down, staring at it for a long moment. Martinez crossed his arms. So, what now? Jake looked up, his expression like steel. Now. He cracked his knuckles. We finished this. Jake set his phone down, his jaw clenched. You just declared war on an empire. Whoever was on the other end of that call wasn't bluffing. The real masterminds behind this network had finally stepped out of the shadows. And they weren't going to run. They were going to fight back. Jake looked up at Marshall and Martinez. We don't have much time. They'll be coming for us. Marshall exhaled. And this time, it won't be just cops or hitmen. It'll be everyone. Martinez cracked his knuckles. Then we better hit first. Jake nodded. We need to make sure this doesn't get buried. We need more than just the leak. We need people in the right places to act on it. Marshall frowned. We just exposed some of the most powerful people in the country. Who's going to help us now? Jake thought for a moment. Then, he had an idea. There's only one person I know who hates these guys as much as we do. Marshall's eyes narrowed. Who? Jake met her gaze. The district attorney. District Attorney Michael Carter was a tough man. Mid-50s, graying hair, a reputation for being unshakable. Which is why when Jake, Marshall, and Martinez stormed into his office at the crack of dawn, the man barely even blinked. He looked up from his desk, completely calm. Officer Coleman, he said, lacing his fingers together. I assume this is about the storm you just unleashed on my city? Jake didn't flinch. You already know what's in those files. Carter nodded. Every news station is running it. The governor is calling for emergency investigations. Jake stepped forward. We need you to go public. Issue arrest warrants for every name on that list. We can't let them slip away while they try to clean this up. Carter sighed, rubbing his temples. You don't get it, do you? Jake clenched his fists. What? Carter looked at him, his expression tired. This corruption? It's deeper than just names on a list. These people have power, influence. They will not go down without a fight. You think a simple press conference is going to fix this? Jake gritted his teeth. Then we fight back harder. Carter studied him. Then, after a long pause, he nodded. All right, Coleman. He grabbed his phone. I'll make the calls. I'll issue the warrants. Jake exhaled. Good. But before he could feel any relief, a gunshot rang out. Glass shattered. Carter jerked back in his chair, blood blooming across his chest. Jake's heart stopped. Sniper. Martinez lunged forward, grabbing Carter, but the DA was already choking on his own blood. Marshall grabbed Jake's arm. We have to move now. Jake's entire body tensed. The network had just sent a message. They weren't going to let this play out. They were eliminating everyone. Jake gritted his teeth. Then let's finish this. Carter was dead. The city was in chaos. The governor had ordered a statewide emergency review, but Jake knew what was coming next, a purge. Every dirty cop, judge, and politician was going to wipe their tracks. Jake, Marshall, and Martinez sat in a safe house, staring at a digital map of the city. This is it, Jake said, pointing at the network's headquarters. A private skyscraper downtown, listed as a law firm but actually the command center for the entire operation. Marshall frowned. And what exactly do we do when we get there? Walk in and ask for a confession? Jake shook his head. We finish what we started. Martinez leaned back. You're talking about a full-on assault, aren't you? Jake's eyes burned with determination. We take them down. Jake, Marshall, and Martinez moved through the skyscraper's parking garage. They weren't alone. Martinez had called in a few trusted officers. A team of 6 men, armed and ready. They reached the security doors. Jake turned to the team. We go in quiet. No warning. We neutralize every hostile and secure the main servers. Marshall exhaled. And then? Jake's grip tightened on his weapon. Then we bring the Empire down. Martinez smirked. Let's do it. They moved in. The security guards barely had time to react before Jake's team took them out silently. They entered the main floor, a massive office space filled with executives, lawyers, and operatives who knew exactly what was going on. The second they saw Jake and his team, panic exploded. People scrambled to destroy documents, smash hard drives. Martinez fired into the air. Nobody moved. Jake stormed toward the main server room. They had one shot at this. He kicked the door open and froze. Inside, standing calmly by the main server, was a woman, dressed in a sharp black suit, late 50s, cold, calculating eyes. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She just smiled. "Officer Coleman," she said smoothly, "I've been expecting you." Jake's blood ran cold. Marshall stepped in beside him, whispering, "Who the hell is this?" The woman tilted her head. "The one you should have been worried about all along." She clasped her hands together. "You think you've won? You think this little raid means anything?" She let out a slow, amused sigh. "You're playing checkers, Mr. Coleman." She gestured toward the servers. "Go ahead. Leak whatever you want. Arrest whoever you like. You think this is the Empire?" Her smirk widened. "This is just one of many." Jake's pulse pounded. Marshall whispered, "Jake?" "She's not bluffing." Jake stared at the woman. She had no fear, no desperation, just confidence. And that's when he realized this wasn't the end of the network. This was just one piece. And there were dozens more. His hands tightened into fists. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started. Jake stared at the woman. She was completely calm, unshaken, amused, even. And that's when it hit him. She had expected this. Everything. The exposure, the arrests, the leaks. She had already planned for it. This wasn't a victory. This was a warning. "You don't even look worried," Jake said, his voice low. The woman tilted her head slightly, her smirk unwavering. "Because I'm not." Marshall clenched her jaw. "Who are you?" The woman sighed, as if bored of the question. "I go by many names, but for now, let's just say I'm." She gave a small, satisfied smile. The next level up, Jake felt his chest tighten. "Grayson was working for you." She nodded. "Him, Langston, half the names on that hard drive. But you already figured that out, didn't you?" Martinez tensed. "And now you're gonna tell us what? That this is all pointless? That we can't stop you?" The woman's smirk softened. "Oh, you can stop me. Maybe even shut this little branch down. But what happens after that, Officer Coleman?" She took a slow step forward. "You think this is the whole network?" Her eyes glimmered with amusement. No. This is just a small piece." She clasped her hands behind her back. "You exposed some names, made some noise. A few of my associates will be sacrificed. But the machine?" Her smile widened. "The machine keeps running." Jake's stomach twisted. He had known this corruption ran deep, but this was bigger than he had imagined. The woman sighed. "So now the real question is," she stepped closer, lowering her voice, "are you willing to burn your whole life down to chase shadows?" Jake didn't move. The room was silent. For a brief second, doubt crept into his mind. How deep did this go? How many levels were there? Would taking down this piece really change anything? Marshall must have sensed his hesitation because she stepped beside him, her voice steady. "Jake," she said, "we don't back down." Jake clenched his jaw. He thought about Langston's corruption, about Grayson, about all the people who had suffered because of this network. And then he thought about his family, his sister, his mom. If no one fought back, what kind of world were they going to live in? Jake's grip on his gun tightened. "You want to know the difference between us?" he said, stepping forward. The woman raised an eyebrow. "Do tell." Jake's eyes burned with determination. "You hide in the dark." He leveled his weapon. "I drag people into the light." And then he pulled the trigger. The skyscraper raid was all over the news. Dozens of arrests. Corrupt officials, judges, law enforcement officers, all exposed. And the woman? Gone. The second Jake fired, she had vanished into the chaos. No records. No real name. No trace of where she had gone. But one thing was clear. Jake had cut off the head of the snake. But the body was still moving. The city was in upheaval. With the network exposed, politicians scrambled to distance themselves. Investigations were launched. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. Jake stood outside the police station, looking up at the building where he had once been just a rookie cop. Now, he was something else. Martinez walked up beside him. So, what's next for you? Jake exhaled. I don't know. Marshall approached, arms crossed. You could walk away, you know. After everything, no one would blame you. Jake nodded slowly. He could leave. He had done his part. But deep down, he knew the truth. The machine keeps running, and as long as it did, someone had to fight back. Jake turned to them, his jaw set. I'm not done yet. Marshall smirked. Didn't think you would be. Martinez grinned, shaking his head. Rookie, you're either the dumbest cop I've ever met, or the bravest. Jake chuckled. Probably both. He glanced at the skyline, the city still reeling from everything that had happened. There were more names out there, more people pulling the strings. And as long as they existed, Jake Coleman was coming for them. The war wasn't over. It had just begun.